Grüezi, Kevin. Am I pronounced it correctly?
Yes.
Both the
Very
Grüezi and the
perfect.
Kevin?
Grüezi, yeah. But here in my region we say salut.
Ah,
So,
salut.
Yeah, because my region is actually half French speaking and half German, and we use salut instead of grüezi.
Fair enough. Thank you for enlightening me. And the reason I say Grüezi or salut, as I should be saying, for our viewers, is that you're based in Switzerland, just like I am.
Yes, exactly.
All right, Kevin, thanks for making the time. You are one of our Dev Library authors, contributors. So I'm very glad you accepted the invitation to have a video interview with me today. It's going to be a short discussion. But before anything else, the first question I always ask the people I interview is to introduce themselves. And for that, you have the choice. You can use 3 words or 3 numbers or both or anything else you'd like to say, really.
Okay, I think I'm going with both, a mix of words and numbers. So I think the words that describe me, or at least me as a developer the most, are curious and passionate, because I'm now in tech, and in tech are so many things to explore and so many new things to learn, and I'm really curious about learning as much as possible. And I approach every day as a first day, basically, because I want to learn like new things. And I'm pretty passionate about the things, because staying curious only works if you are passionate. And I'm also passionate about sharing everything that I learn in blog posts, video tutorials, or open source contributions. And the number that probably describes my career or me as a developer is probably 21. And 21 because if you think of programmers, or if you talk to programmers, people have like this illusion that a programmer is somebody that already started with 14 or 15. It's like kind of this genius that started to write code in his early years. But I, in fact, never wrote like any line of code until the age of 21. So it was pretty late. I did like a normal marketing apprenticeship and then just realized that I really love working with computers, although I had no idea of code. And then suddenly I entered a new university, and with 21, I wrote my first line of code. So that was pretty, yeah. I think it's not the usual path, but it also works as long as you are passionate and curious.
Could I ask you what led you to code when you were 21? Like, how did you become aware that you were interested? And then where did you get started? Because today, among other things, you seem to be an expert of Angular to the point that you're a Google Developer Expert. And for those who don't know what the expert program is, there's going to be a link in the description. Do you want to share a little bit about your journey since you were 21, or just as you started to learn coding? What led you to that? What inspired you? And then how did you progress towards becoming an expert?
So what inspired me in the beginning was actually funny, because I was working in marketing, as I said, and I was doing a lot of stuff on the computer. And I kind of like to create things. Like, I was not programming at all. I was just doing like some small presentations or some flyers for marketing activities. And I just liked to work on the computer and to create things. And then I was thinking, what could I study, because I was interested in doing some studies. And then I saw this interesting program of like a business economy. It's basically called business economy with informatics. Business informatics it's actually called. And that sounded pretty interesting, because I already had the business background and I knew that I want to do something with computers. And so I thought, yeah, cool, I will do something that combines those both passions. And then when I started university, in the first course, I was actually pretty lost, because they were talking about strings and Java and SQL and stuff, and I have never heard of this. And to be honest, initially I thought like, this is not for me, I will quit. But then I started to be more curious and dive a little bit into the topic. And yeah, from there on, I kind of improved and started learning. And yeah, it was really an interesting journey. And later on, I really shined in programming. So it was interesting. I initially started school because I thought, yeah, I already have the business background and I want to learn a bit more about informatics. But then once on my journey, I really discovered that informatics is what I want to do. So I want to leave away the business program, the business side, basically. And then, yeah, I landed my first job after university. And I really stayed curious. As I said, staying curious, I think, is the key. because I traveled like 1 hour from my home to my workplace and 1 hour back. So I used all days like 2 hours of train ride. And I used this time to work on open source or to basically learn new things, read blog posts or watch YouTube videos. That was basically what I was doing. And yeah, it led to the point where I then changed, where I had enough knowledge to change from being like a consumer of this open source and blog posts to be a creator. So I switched a bit from consuming open source content to create open source content. And yeah, that basically then at some point got me to that expert level.
How long did it take for you to switch from consuming to producing?
Yeah, roughly I would say like 2.5 years probably. But yeah, initially I was pretty afraid of actually producing content, because I always thought, yeah, what if it's not perfect? What if people think like this is not good enough, or this content is like not well written, or there's more to know about this topic? Until one day, one of my colleagues told me like, okay, I saw you have a blog post, but why don't you actually promote it or like publish it? Because I had written it internally, so it was internally accessible, and he found it great. And he was basically saying, yeah, this could be useful to other people as well, so why not publish it? And yeah, then I basically took that step. So that was for me the critical thing. It was less about the time, but more about the shift in mind, so that I can also put it out and it can be helpful to others. And looking backwards, I think I should have done that even earlier. So that was kind of a learning, because I always saw myself as this junior who is like learning and getting better. But actually to go to that expert level, I think it's important that you also produce stuff and not only consume stuff.
This is fascinating. This is very consistent with what other contributors like yourself have shared with me. This importance of sharing and learning also by sharing to solidify your own understanding. Now, you're one of the most prolific authors of Dev Library, because you have, I think, 5 or 6 or 7 pieces of content selected, both blog posts and GitHub projects. So I'd like to talk about those a little bit, what's about them, or the ones that you're most proud of. I've noticed doing my homework, 2 of them, the GitHub repos. One is about SortGrid. I'll let you talk about it. And the other one is called Pretty HTML. Likewise, I'll let you talk about it if you'd like, or any other blog post that you have posted on Dev Library. Do you want to talk about those a little bit, just to share the work that you've shared with others?
Yeah, so the blog posts, I have a lot of blog posts. I think one that I also contributed to Dev Library is basically how to set up your Angular library. So from 0 to a full published NPM package. And I think that's pretty cool for everybody that's viewing right now, because this is basically a step-to-step guide on how to share or how to create an open source project and publish it as an NPM library so that others can use. And I also use these instructions in this blog post, for example, for ng-sortgrid. And ng-sortgrid is something that was initially used at my client. So they wanted to have this sort grid where you have like multiple items and you can sort it in various directions. And there were already some existing projects out there, but they were not actually solving the case of sorting horizontally and vertically, because they were only using horizontal sort or something. And also it was important that you have like a sort grid where you can always access the sorting order. So when you sort something, that you get an output event with the new sorting order. And then during my client, so I thought like, why implement this specifically for my client? And why not just share this with everybody? Because I think it's something cool. And then I went home, and basically on my weekend, I implemented ng-sortgrid. And my client was also happy because they didn't have to pay me to implement it. So they got it for free. And other people can now use it. And yeah, ng-sortgrid is pretty cool if you have any kind of items. That was something I was focusing on, that it doesn't only work for like divs. It also works for buttons even, or images, so that you can sort any kind of elements.
And Pretty HTML is to make a better representation of what is going into the output of the console, correct? It's to help debugging components and others.
Yeah, Pretty HTML log. So there are actually 2 projects. One is Pretty HTML log, which is a base project that takes any kind of HTML string, highlights it, and pretty prints it to the console. Because usually if you print any HTML string to the console, it will not appear as really highlighted, so it will all be white and no colors and not well formatted. And that's the base project. But I wrote an Angular wrapper around it, and the specific use case for that is once you start using Jest in your Angular project, sometimes you will have some errors in your test. And then it's pretty hard to debug. And still, I know, but still the greatest debugger on earth is console log, for me at least. There are for sure other cool ways to debug, but console log is pretty cool. And then what I was doing in my project was console log the fixture's HTML. And then I got like a really long, ugly string, and it was hard to see what was actually wrong. So I came up with this idea, okay, why not pretty HTML log? So that basically with pretty HTML log, you can use a PHL method that you can import, and then it will pretty print the HTML to the console. So this makes debugging Angular components, which are tested with Jest, much easier. And yeah, under the hood, it uses this base project that's only purpose is to pretty print an HTML string.
I'll link the author page of yourself in the description so people can find all these blog posts and GitHub repos. And I'm sure you have tons of other things, and I look forward to future contributions from you. There are many JavaScript frameworks. What led you to Angular in particular? What would you say to someone who wants to get started and is looking to use a JavaScript framework and does not know what to choose?
Yeah, so if I share my personal story, it's pretty interesting because actually, usually people use JavaScript and then choose their desired framework, like Angular, JS, back in the days was Angular JS or React, or they choose their framework, but they come from JavaScript. For me, it was a bit different because I started with Angular JS, and Angular JS brought me to JavaScript, which was very interesting because I wrote my first Angular line before I even wrote my first JavaScript line. That was something pretty interesting. So Angular brought me to the front end actually, because yeah, it was a pretty cool framework and I could be very productive with it. So that's also something why I would recommend Angular in general. So I'm not saying that other frameworks are bad, but for me, Angular is still my choice because I think I'm very productive with it. And what surprises me most about Angular is that it's not only a framework, it's a platform actually, because it has like built-in solutions for all kinds of problems. So do you want to perform an HTTP request? Angular HTTP. Do you want to implement an app that has routing? Angular router. Or do you want to maybe even implement an app that is focused on initial load and performance? Then you can use a server-side rendered app with Angular Universal. So you have like all this kind of out-of-the-box solutions which make you very, very productive.
What challenges have you faced in your journey in becoming more advanced, or even today? What are the kind of challenges you're faced with when you're coding? And how do you overcome these challenges? What is your method when you're stuck on something?
Yeah, when I'm stuck, basically a good method is just to take a short break, take a short walk, come back, and then basically take a step back from the actual problem and try to see it from another perspective. Because sometimes when you're stuck, then you are like too deep into it and maybe you are chasing the wrong path. So that's some advice I would give to somebody that is stuck with a particular problem. And yeah, in generally, it also general things that are challenging is, I think it's very challenging to come up with a nice and simple solution to a hard problem. I think in the projects that I've seen, a lot of hard problems were solved with, or even simple problems were solved with unnecessary complexity. And I think the true art of like very well-written code and engineering is to come up with simple solutions for hard problems.
What is conversely, the worst piece of advice you've heard when it comes to coding or Angular or just the general tech industry? Is there anything that you hear and you're thinking, this doesn't make sense, or this is not true?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. So one thing, for example, is that everything has to be always perfect. So I think it's really good that you are not afraid of making mistakes, because I think if you are too afraid of making mistakes or introducing some bugs, then you will you will not go forward. You will always kind of stuck with what you have. And I think it's very good to try out things and also be aware that sometimes things can go wrong and you can introduce a bug, but it's still important to go forward. Then another thing that also kind of leads to the previous question that you asked is, I think it doesn't make sense to blindly apply what we've learned in university or what we hear sometimes on conferences. So for example, in Angular, we often hear this term that everything has to be a stream with RxJS. And I mean, everything can be a stream, but it shouldn't in all cases. So sometimes it makes things more complicated if you just blindly follow these credos of, like, for example, abstraction is another thing. In university, we learn these patterns of abstractions, and if you just blindly apply them, I think it can make your life harder, because sometimes composition is the right way to go over abstraction. And I think you should always kind of try to come up with the right solution for your problem. And yeah, I think that's something that I would not blindly follow those patterns that we learned. For sure, they make sense in a lot of scenarios, but not always.
Thank you for sharing. What excites you going forward? Anything about Angular specifically that you're hoping to see, or other pieces of technology, Google related or not, by the way, that you'd like to try or code with? Is there anything that is on the horizon for you that you're interested with?
Yeah, so Angular is now working on standalone components. So currently in Angular we have ng modules, and ng modules bring a lot of things, especially regarding bundle size. So they kind of blow up the bundle. And the Angular team is now working on standalone components. And I think that's very interesting. If we can just simply render components, that would make it, I think it would make the bundle much smaller, or I hope that it makes the bundle much smaller. But another thing that is also cool, I have heard from a lot of students when I was teaching workshops that basically ng modules is a bit confusing for them. And I think if we have standalone components, maybe the framework gets even easier to learn.
Any final words for developers who are watching this video?
Yeah, I think just the things that I said in the beginning, just don't be afraid of pushing stuff out. So always stay curious and passionate, try to learn new things, adapt new things. And if you write something cool, why not push it out and share it? I mean, because you will get feedback. So first of all, you will probably help some other developer, but you will also get feedback on your code. And this feedback is very valuable because it helps you improve your skill set. And also, yeah, you will become a better developer by pushing stuff out. So don't be afraid of just, if you have a cool idea, a cool project, just open source it, create an npm package, or write about it, or create even a YouTube video.
Excellent. Thank you for your very inspiring and encouraging words, Kevin. Thank you very much. Merci.
Thanks for having me. Merci.